Hollywood spent decades trying to understand the marriage between Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley. The media called it a publicity stunt. Critics said it was fake. Even their closest friends questioned whether it was real. But there was one moment on their wedding night that revealed the truth nobody wanted to believe. A moment that explained why Lisa Marie defended Michael until her dying day. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this marriage was actually the most real relationship Michael Jackson ever had. Let's dive in. Let me paint the picture for you. May 26, 1994. Dominican Republic. A secret ceremony that shocked the world when it was announced 2 months later. Michael Jackson, the biggest star on the planet, married Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of Elvis, the only other entertainer who understood what it meant to live in that level of fame. The media immediately declared it a sham, a calculated move to repair Michael's image after the 1993 allegations. But here's what most people don't know. This marriage started long before anyone realized. Michael and Lisa Marie first met in 1975 at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. She was 7 years old, he was 17. Her father, Elvis, brought her backstage to meet the Jackson Five, but they didn't reconnect until 1993, right when Michael's world was falling apart. The timing seemed suspicious to outsiders, but anyone who understands how trauma bonds work knows exactly what was happening. Lisa Marie reached out to Michael in January 1993, months before the allegations broke. She called him. They started talking on the phone for hours, 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. This wasn't a business arrangement. This was two people who grew up in the same impossible world finding each other. Here's where it gets interesting. Lisa Marie was married to Danny Keough at the time. She had 2 young children. Her life looked stable from the outside. But she later admitted something that changes everything. She said she fell in love with Michael during those phone calls, before the scandal, before the media circus, before anyone could accuse her of trying to save his reputation. She fell in love with the person nobody else got to know, the one who existed when the cameras were off. And here's what those conversations revealed. Michael would call her from Neverland, sometimes from hotel rooms around the world. They talked about everything except what the world expected. Not about music, not about fame. They talked about their fathers, about the weight of legacy, about what it felt like to be recognized everywhere, but understood nowhere. Lisa Marie later said Michael told her things he'd never told anyone. About his childhood, about the beatings from Joe Jackson, about standing in recording studios at 2 in the morning when he was 8 years old, watching his brothers get to go home while he had to do another take. About never being allowed to just be a kid. But that's not all. Lisa Marie shared her own trauma. She told Michael about finding Elvis dead when she was 9 years old. About being raised by people who worshipped her father's memory but couldn't see her as separate from his legacy. About feeling like a museum piece in her own life. And Michael understood in a way nobody else could, because he was living the same prison, just with different bars. These weren't casual phone calls. These were therapy sessions between two people who'd been raised as products instead of children. Now here's the kicker. When the allegations hit in August 1993, Lisa Marie didn't run. She did the opposite. She divorced Danny Keough in May 1994 and married Michael 20 days later. 20 days. Think about what that timeline reveals. This wasn't a slow, calculated PR strategy. This was a woman who made a choice and committed to it immediately. But the world wasn't ready to believe that someone like Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, with her own money, her own legacy, her own options, would actually choose to be with Michael Jackson during the worst moment of his life unless it was real. But that's not all. On their wedding night, something happened that Lisa Marie kept private for almost 15 years. She finally revealed it in a 2009 interview, just months after Michael's death. And when you hear what Michael said to her that night, everything about this marriage suddenly makes sense. They were alone in their suite. The ceremony was over, the documents were signed, and Michael looked at her and said something that stopped her cold. He told her he was terrified, not of the allegations, not of the media. He was terrified that she would leave him once she really knew him. That she would realize he wasn't worth staying for. Lisa Marie later described that moment in detail. She said Michael's hands were shaking. This was the man who'd performed in front of billions, who commanded stages across the world, who never showed weakness in public. But standing in front of her, he was completely exposed. He told her he'd never let anyone see him like this. Not his brothers, not his mother, not any of the women before her, because everyone eventually left. Everyone eventually chose the idea of Michael Jackson over the reality of Michael, and he was convinced she would too. Think about what that means. The most famous man in the world, Michael Jackson, was standing in front of his new wife, completely vulnerable, convinced he wasn't enough. This wasn't the confident performer the world saw. This was the person who'd been told his entire life that his value was in what he could do, not who he was. And Lisa Marie's response is what sealed this marriage as real. She didn't comfort him with words. She told him she already knew who he was. That's why she was there. She'd seen him at his worst, heard him at his most broken during those phone calls, and she chose him anyway. She told him something else that night, something she revealed years later in a private letter that was published after her death. She told Michael that she understood what it meant to be loved for a ghost instead of a person, that people looked at her and only saw Elvis's daughter. They didn't see Lisa Marie, and she saw the same thing happening to him. People loved Michael Jackson, the icon, but Michael the person was invisible. She told him that night that she wasn't there for the icon. She was there for the invisible man. This is where it gets deeply personal. Lisa Marie later said that Michael was the most normal person she'd ever been with. Let that sink in. Michael Jackson, the man who lived at Neverland Ranch, who had a pet chimp, who wore military jackets and surgical masks. Lisa Marie Presley, who grew up at Graceland with Elvis, said Michael was the most normal relationship she'd ever had. How is that possible? Because they both understood something nobody else in their lives could. They understood what it meant to be a possession instead of a person. Elvis was owned by Colonel Tom Parker. Michael was owned by the industry, by his father, by everyone who profited from his talent. Lisa Marie and Michael both grew up watching their fathers lose themselves to fame, and they both spent their lives trying not to disappear the same way. Here's what the press never understood. This marriage wasn't about saving Michael's career. It was about two people trying to save each other from the loneliness of being constantly watched but never truly seen. Lisa Marie gave an interview in 2003 where she said something that really stuck. She said Michael would tell her, "I don't know if you love me or the idea of me." Think about the weight of that statement. Even when he was married, even when someone chose to be with him during the worst time of his life, Michael couldn't believe it was real. And Lisa Marie admitted she didn't always know how to convince him. But wait. If this marriage was so real, why did it only last 2 years? Here's the truth nobody wants to talk about. The marriage didn't fail because it was fake. It failed because it was too real in a world that demanded performance. Lisa Marie said Michael wanted children immediately. He talked about it constantly. But she wasn't ready. She'd just left a marriage. She had 2 young kids. And Michael's need for a family wasn't just about wanting children. It was about creating the childhood he never had. The pressure became unbidden, not because Michael was manipulative, but because his trauma was so deep that love alone couldn't fill it. There was another factor that nobody discusses: the enablers. Michael's world was filled with people who told him yes to everything. Doctors who prescribed whatever he asked for. Managers who prioritized profit over his well-being. Family members who needed him functional, not healthy. Lisa Marie tried to protect him from that world. She tried to get him into real therapy. She tried to cut off the people she knew were hurting him. But Michael had been conditioned since childhood to trust his handlers more than his own instincts. And when Lisa Marie pushed back against the machine pushed harder. She later said it was like watching someone drown, while people on the shore threw them anvils instead of life preservers. And here's exactly how that destroyed them. Lisa Marie said she would have done anything for Michael except one thing. She couldn't fix him. She could love him. She could defend him. She could stand by him when the world turned against him. But she couldn't heal wounds that were carved into him before she ever existed. And Michael needed someone who could. Not because he was selfish, but because he didn't know how to exist without someone taking care of him. The industry had trained him from age 5 to be dependent, to perform, to produce, but never to self-sustain emotionally. Let me break down exactly what an outside observer could never understand about this marriage. They could never understand what it's like to grow up with a last name that's heavier than your body. Lisa Marie carried Presley. Michael carried Jackson. Those aren't just names. They're expectations. legacies, curses. They could never understand what it's like to have your childhood photographed, documented, sold. Every awkward phase, every mistake, every private moment turned into public property. They could never understand the loneliness of being surrounded by people who want something from you. Access, money, reflected fame. Never just you. They could never understand what it means to love someone the world is determined to misunderstand. Lisa Marie knew what the headlines would say. She married him anyway. They could never understand the specific trauma of watching your father be destroyed by the same machine that made him a legend. Elvis and Joe Jackson broke their children in different ways, but the result was the same, and they could never understand why someone would stay in a marriage that was doomed from the start. Because when you've spent your whole life performing, sometimes the only real thing you have is the person who sees through the performance. Here's exactly how to think about it. The world saw a spectacle. Lisa Marie saw a man who called her at 3 in the morning because he couldn't sleep, who watched cartoons with her kids, who cried when he talked about his mother. The media analyzed their public appearances. She lived with the person who existed between them. There's a fundamental difference. Now, here's where it gets even better. After the divorce in 1996, Lisa Marie could have walked away clean. She could have sold her story. She could have joined the crowd of people who doubted Michael. But she didn't. Even when they weren't together anymore, even when it would have been easier to distance herself, Lisa Marie defended Michael Jackson for 13 more years. When the 2003 allegations happened, she spoke up for him. When people questioned his ability to be a father, she said he was born to be a parent. When he died in 2009, she wrote that she tried to save him and couldn't. That's not the behavior of someone who was in a fake marriage. That's the behavior of someone who loved somebody and lost them to something bigger than both of them. And here's something that makes this even more powerful. In 2005, during Michael's trial, Lisa Marie wanted to testify on his behalf. She contacted his legal team. She was willing to take the stand and tell the world what she knew about Michael as a person, as someone who genuinely loved children in the purest way. But Michael's lawyers advised against it. They were worried the prosecution would use their divorce against them, would twist her testimony into something that hurt more than helped. So she stayed silent, publicly. But privately, she sent Michael letters. She called him. She told him she believed him. Michael kept those letters until he died. Lisa Marie gave one final interview about Michael in 2010. She was asked if she regretted the marriage, and her answer reveals everything. She said she regretted the divorce, not the marriage, the divorce. She said walking away from Michael was the biggest mistake of her life because she abandoned him when he needed her most. And she spent the rest of her life wondering if staying could have changed what happened to him. Think about the weight of that. She carried that guilt until she died in 2023. So remember that moment on their wedding night. Michael, terrified he wasn't enough. Lisa Marie, telling him she already knew who he was and chose him anyway. That moment wasn't the beginning of a publicity stunt. It was the beginning of the only relationship where Michael Jackson felt like he could be afraid, be broken, be human. And Lisa Marie spent the rest of her life proving that what they had was real, even when the world refused to believe it. The marriage between Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a strategy. It was two people born into impossible legacies trying to find something real in a world built on illusions. And the fact that it couldn't survive doesn't make it any less true. It makes it tragic. So, there you have it. The real story behind Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley's marriage. The moment on their wedding night that explained everything. And why the world's refusal to believe in it says more about us than it does about them. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.